joining us remotely as well as in person. Occasionally, we'll bring forward a zoning code text amendment or zoning, some cities call it a ZTA, zoning text amendment. We typically, as staff, we will compile margin notes on things that seem to come up quite frequently with our customer base. Either we might hear from you as a board and commission, or we might hear from applicants or residents. So we've been compiling a few items and wanted to go over a few with you. We won't make any decisions tonight. We'd like your input and see if this is something you'd like us to move forward with, spend more time on. So we'll be asking you to looking for a consensus to proceed or not proceed on a potential zoning code amendment. Let's see. I've talked about this before on how we amend the zoning code. So I've already covered the first bullet point, but for instance, section 4 of the zoning code outlines the process in which we typically make amendments to it. The initiation of the amendment, we're talking tonight about a text amendment. Usually if we have a zoning map amendment, it's a rezoning application chart or filed by an applicant or developer, zoning attorney, planner, landscape architect, etc. So tonight this would be a staff initiated request. We have 5 topics we'd like to talk to you about, some omissions, a little bit of a cleanup that we think are appropriate for us to staff to pursue with you tonight with Planning and Zoning Commission. The first section under definitions, we found a couple of omissions of some land uses that we have in the city, but they're not defined. Under Chapter 9, Health and Sanitation, that's really related to parking, and I'll get into that momentarily. Chapter 12, Traffic and Motor Vehicles. Chapter 14, Subdivision Regulations. We don't do a lot of subdivision plats in Litchfield Park because we're primarily built out. We have recently, between planning and engineering, processed a lot split or minor land division for the Carl's Jr. Take 5 site up on Camelback Road. And then finally, Section 29, Parking and Loading Regulations. Under the Section 2 regarding definitions, we'd like to propose adding 2 definitions. One is community facilities. We noticed that we don't define that in the zoning code, and so we'd like to add a new definition, and these would all be in alphabetical order. Your copy, if you're looking at a hard copy, may not be in red font. That's an omission on my part. But community facilities would be a public place where members of the community gather for various activities. These activities can be recreational, educational, artistic, social, or cultural. Community facilities can include buildings, equipment, lands, and grounds for these purposes. So we just thought from a procedural standpoint, we might want to add that. The second one is we don't have a definition of what a convalescent home is. So we're proposing that we add, again, alphabetically, convalescent home would be a residential medical facility. Medical facilities intended to provide medical and skilled nursing care for residents who are typically recovering from a surgery, fall, or illness. The next section, also under definitions, just a couple of minor tweaks to landscaping. With the recent adoption by council of RV parking screening, we thought that we needed to pay a little bit closer attention, so we're suggesting that landscaping definition, we would drop the S under combinations, so the landscaping definition would read, shall consist of any of the following or combination thereof, with, again, the S being dropped off, thereof, materials such as, but not limited to, grass, ground cover, shrubs, vines, hedges, trees, or palms, and non-living durable material commonly used in landscaping such as, but not limited to, and we're suggesting we add the word decomposed granite. That's our typical, a lot of people call it gravel. The proper landscape architecture term in the Phoenix area is decomposed granite. So we're just suggesting that we add those two words there. Chapter 9, Health and Sanitation. Section 9-5-5. Planning works closely with our code compliance office, which happens to be right next door here. We've been looking at this for quite a while now, and we're suggesting an edit under item H in the ordinance that would read, recreational vehicles, watercraft, utility trailers, or any non-vehicle mounted camper shell or truck camper shall not be stored within the front yard for residential use. Such recreational vehicle, watercraft, utility trailer, or camper may be temporarily parked in a front driveway for a period of time not to exceed, we're suggesting that be dropped from 3 days to 2, 48 hours. And then from our code compliance folks, they asked if we would talk to P&Z about maybe adding this particular section, like how often this could be done. So we're looking for your input tonight of up to 2 times per month. And this would be for the loading, unloading, cleaning, and maintenance of all of those facilities or vehicles that I mentioned. So again, no decision making tonight, but any input that you might have on this particular topic, we can either come back to this or I'll just keep going. We only have a couple more slides. Okay, thank you. Residential parking, this is under Chapter 12, Traffic and Motor Vehicles. This is actually coming from our city manager. He had asked me over the summer about something that has been on his radar in terms of vehicle parking. This relates to, I believe there was an issue about a year ago when I wasn't here, related to an individual in Litchfield Park that was basically, they had a work truck that was visible. I'm not sure where it was in the city, but it was parked out front on an approved surface, but it had the business name. So we've looked at other cities in terms of how they handle commercial vehicles, and so we looked at Paradise Valley, we've looked at Phoenix, looked at Glendale, looked at some of the West Valley cities, and so the amendment here under residential parking, section 12-4-7, I'll just walk you through the suggested edit. So it's under item E. The way it reads now is it has the word commercial vehicles. We're suggesting eliminate the word commercial. And so we would capitalize vehicles, so the new provision for this section under item E would be vehicles and trailers that display a business name or other forms of advertising shall be parked in an enclosed garage and not visible from the public street. And then just sequentially, the exceptions text, that's currently item E, and that would move down one to item number F. So no changes on item F regarding exceptions. Chapter 14 is regarding subdivisions. Like I said, we don't do a lot of subdivision plats in Litchfield Park. The way it reads right now in Chapter 14 under 14-5, it basically says lot splits and minor land divisions. We do some level of lot combinations, so in working with the city engineer, we were just suggesting to change that title of that section to lot splits, lot combinations and minor land divisions. And then further in that section, under item Z as in zebra, we would just add the word lot combination when it's talking about what a minor land division or MLD is. And so you'll see in the text, we're just suggesting adding the words lot combination or combinations under item Z. Parking and loading regulations, I know we talked about this before, earlier this summer. Commissioner Frazier is not here tonight, but when we were trying to deal with parking next to view fencing, it was in a different section, and I recall, I believe it was at your June meeting, Commissioner Frazier said, hey, I understand what you're trying to do with providing clarity on where people could park vehicles next to view fencing, but I don't think this is in the right section. So we took a look at that over the summer and thought we should just cover this particular item under section 29. So in section 29.05, location of required parking spaces and parking areas under item A, residential uses. The new text, the way it reads today is that parking spaces for residential uses shall be on site. Parking spaces required by section 29.13 shall not be in the rear yard except in an enclosed garage, period. And then we were suggesting the new text in red, which would read, parking adjacent to side yard view fences is not allowed on lots requiring a side yard view fence. And I think that was, that's really in a nutshell what we're proposing for some cleanup items. If there is consensus from the commission tonight, again, we wouldn't have you vote on this, just basically coming into agreement that if this is something that you want us to keep working on, we'll do a little bit more research, make sure we're getting the wording just right, and then we would come back at a future hearing and have you have the commission actually hold a public hearing and discuss it further and potentially vote on it.
You want to just start ripping through them? Just put
Sure.
up whichever one you want comments on first. And
Sure. Yeah, we can start with definitions if you'd like.
Okay. Does anybody have any input, questions, concerns on definitions?
I do.
Go ahead, Commissioner Albee.
First of all, I think that we need to have a clearer definition of where the rear yard begins and the side yard sort of ends, because I know that a lot of people say that the backyard isn't really the backyard as much as it is the side yard, whereas, especially with regard to the parking along the view fences, and that people might park along the view fences, but they say, well, that's part of the side of the yard, not the backyard. Well, where does the backyard actually begin? Does it begin at the end or the furthest most point that the primary building extends into the backyard? So I just think, I've looked at this in the past where we do have a definition, but I just don't think it's necessarily as clear as maybe it should be. And I know that sounds a little bit silly, but I think that the more clarity we have, the better our zoning code is.
Just have note of that.
Yes, thank you. Through the chair, Commissioner Albee, we'll take a look at that. This is under section 29, parking and loading regulations. We'll do a little bit more research on that and come up with, make sure that we're covering the notes that you just mentioned.
Okay, so for the definitions, so I think we had convalescent homes and public facilities. Anybody have any comments on those two definitions? I'm not seeing any. If you want want to go to the next?
Landscaping.
Does anybody have any comments on landscaping? And
I do,
go ahead, Commissioner Alvey.
yeah. I think we might want to add artificial grass to that. I know it says grass, but it doesn't say artificial grass. I don't know if that's considered non-living durable material commonly used in landscaping, or if it falls under that category. But if it doesn't, it might be good to just have artificial grass, once again, for clarity.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good point. I happen to be on the Architectural Control Committee up in Arrowhead where I live, and that's a very good point, because a lot of the folks up in my neighborhood are making requests to the Architectural Control Committee for artificial grass and turf. So we'll research that and find a spot to include that in there, Commissioner Alvey.
Any other comments or questions on landscaping? Seeing none, let's move on to the next one. Property maintenance. Commissioner O'Connor, go ahead.
I'm just curious where the 48 comes from.
Through the chair, Commissioner O'Connor, this is really coming from like the boots on the ground with our code compliance inspector and the things that her name's Rena, the things that she's hearing out in the field. And so, again, we're looking for input from the commission. If you feel that 72 hours, long weekend is sufficient, we'll just keep it at 72 hours. There's some questions that Rena's getting out in the field from people that are not real keen on this type of parking. Well, how long does somebody have to really clean, unload, load, maintain the RV, the camper, the trailer, etc. So it was looking at tightening that up a little bit. Again, we can research a little bit further, any input that the commission might have tonight. Daniel, I don't know if you have anything to add on the topic.
I mean, the intent is for someone to bring their trailer to their house, the next day get it ready to go on a trip, and then leave, right? That's
Correct.
the intent, not to have it parked there.
Correct.
I mean, to me, 48 hours doesn't sound unreasonable. I just didn't know if there was something some activity that made you guys want to drop it down.
There has been a couple of situations where code has had somebody, a resident, that's been arguing and debating with the code compliance folks on basically this individual wants more time than the 72 hours, which we don't really feel like. We feel 3 days, 72 hours is long enough. So that's really where it's coming from, is what our code folks are hearing out in the field. The 48 hours, the 2 days would basically tighten things up. And like you said, a scenario, somebody picks up the trailer, maybe wherever it's stored at, Friday night, they pack, get everything prepared to ship out on Saturday, and then they're gone. They do their trip. Conversely, when they come back, then they would have 48 hours to unload and clean it, the facility, and then take it back to where it was stored. Basically, this is somebody would not have the ability to have the RV out in an area that's in public view within this time frame. So they would have. Go ahead.
I was saying, can someone technically use the trailer for those 48 hours?
That's the input that we're looking for. So like if you look at, which we did, to benchmark, say, against Paradise Valley, they have a provision, I don't have it in front of me, where they specifically, another section of their zoning code says that you cannot, like these facilities that are listed, the RV, for instance, or camper, you cannot live in it. within the city limits. If that's something that the commission wants us to look at a little bit further and look at the text that Paradise Valley has, we can certainly do that and then come back.
Has enforcement had any issues with it?
No.
Okay.
Not that I'm aware of. Daniel, are you aware of anything
No.
with people living in a camper?
No.
I would say, sorry, this is my last comment.
No,
I
that's
would
okay.
say up to 2 times per month might, I see the intent there, but I think that's unfair because basically if someone comes on a Thursday, gets their house, gets their trailer ready, goes away for the weekend, comes home on Monday, like that's already 2 times.
Right. Okay.
So it would limit them to only being able to do it basically once a month.
Okay, we can look at that. Planning will talk with code and make sure that there's no unintended consequences like you just pointed out.
Commissioner Ledger.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I was focusing in on the 72 hours, and because one of the things that, thinking in terms of a long weekend,
Right.
where you have out-of-town guests that roll in an RV that is now parked in the driveway, and they're not going anywhere until Tuesday morning. So
Right.
if you cut it down to 48 hours, a guest that isn't living in it necessarily, but has it sitting in front of the house, they're gonna have an issue there. The other thought is, things are gonna happen out there, because if they come and go within 72 hours, the code won't even have heard about it before they leave town, but, you know, everybody's been on a trip somewhere or visited relatives somewhere where an RV was used as temporary housing for the kids or whatever they're
Right.
doing. But I don't think those particular uses are where we're gonna have problems. You know, it's people that are storing big RVs. And my other question on that is, how are we defining where the property line is? If they're in a neighborhood that you're allowed to park at the curb, and they have the RV parked in the curb, out at the curb, there it sits, you know, I think we need to look at
Okay.
whether that is allowed, or if it's not, you know, if it is allowed, should it be, or if it's not allowed, should there be exceptions? And I don't know when, but for years, my next door neighbor's brother every winter came to visit with a humongous big RV, and we got to look at it for a month.
Right.
But the saving grace was, we knew that regular as clockwork, and at the end of the month, it would be gone, and you wouldn't see it again for another year. You know, and they weren't sleeping in it, it was just sort of sitting there.
Right.
But I think those are some of the things we're gonna see.
Okay. Well, this is exactly the input that we're looking for, so we'll refine this a little bit and come back and.
Yeah, I'm just thinking if we can figure out a way to have a plan, because these
Okay.
different things occur. And there's always people that are pushing the envelope, you know, that's just human nature. And
Right.
either having it, rather than just saying, well, we'll hope it doesn't happen, we'll work it out, figure out what the most likely scenario we want to approve, where then RANA has some teeth in the
Right.
code to be able to enforce it.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments on this section from a commissioner?
Okay. Thank you.
Not seeing any on this one, let's go to the next one. So we have residential parking. Any questions or comments on this section?
I have a question. We're talking about a business name, that gotta be parked in the garage.
Right.
That's maybe not a problem for a realtor that has their sign on the door of their car, they can get it in the garage. But if you have a guy, for example, and I think we had trouble before, if you've got a guy with a tow truck, you know, the real question is, should it be there,
Right.
you know, at all, but it, you know, or they're not gonna be able to roll it into the, so however we draft it, we need
Okay.
to, I think we need to hit some of those head on, whether it's allowed or not, you know,
And some additional problems would be, not every house in this community has a garage. I mean, there's
Right.
carports. And I keep thinking of like Truly Nolan or Geek Squad, or, so are those people just not allowed to live in our community?
There's right now, up on Old Litchfield Road, there's somebody out there, I've never met them, but apparently he works for one of these home guarantee companies, you know, where you buy it, and there's a little compact car, and it's got the name of the business on the side, and I'm assuming that they own a business, or he's at least an inspector for one of those. And, now, that is one that presumably would fit into the garage, because it's not a big full-size car, but, you know, I guess I've always wondered from the standpoint of commercial, what it is about commercial in and of itself that's bad. I mean, something small like that. I always think of realtors. I don't know too many attorneys that have their name on their door, but realtors seem to like to do that.
Right.
You know, and you see that, and to me, that doesn't necessarily bother me as much as if a guy had a landscaping business and was coming home for the weekend, and the trailer is parked out in the front with a big truck and, you know, everything else. You know, I don't like looking at all of that, so.
Right.
Yeah, I think there's some correlation too with the previous topic, right? Because we don't want an advertising, someone putting a truck out in front of their house and it's just sitting there.
Right.
I think that's different than someone that's using a car as their everyday,
Right.
you know. But if someone's parking a car to advertise their business, that seems different to me, and that maybe could fall in the 48-hour, you know, can't be sitting there for 48 hours or whatever.
Okay, let us research this further. I have seen that vehicle on Old Litchfield Road. I think it's got orange font on the lettering, and
Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
fairly compact car. It
Right.
doesn't look bad. In fact, they've got it parked kind of around the side. You know,
Right.
driving by, you don't even necessarily notice it unless you're
Yeah.
outside.
Yeah, I think my final comment would be, I think it's probably creating more problems than it's solving.
Okay.
I'm not sure, and even just the size of the lettering isn't spelled out either.
right.
And we're talking about something super small and still running into an issue.
Okay.
Commissioner Alvey, do you have
We, like, limited, so to say something along the lines that vehicles that are used for business or whatever, that have anything on them, need to be moved every 48 hours or something along those lines, so they aren't just parked and they're not just signed for a business.
do we already have a section?
I don't know if the city's doing along those lines.
Go ahead.
To the chair, I believe there is already a section of code within the code that says you cannot just park a vehicle with purpose to explicitly advertise
So
on
that
residential
might
or
be-
commercial.
That might be covered in another section.
Yeah.
The other thing to make sure we're specific on, if we're just gonna say if there's advertising, there's lots of vehicles, including mine, where they bought the car from a car dealer and their license plate holder
Sure.
has the dealer's name and phone number on it.
Right.
And mine does, it says Jones Ford.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, a bumper sticker.
Or a sticker.
Yeah,
Yeah.
our bumper, permanent bumper stickers
Right.
too.
Okay. We'll appreciate your input. We'll go back, research a little bit more, and then come back and see you
Any
again.
other questions or comments on this section from the Commissioner? Seeing none, let's move to the next one, subdivision regulation. Are there any questions or comments from a commissioner on this section?
Just so I like a lot combination, that'd be like two lots going into one. Is that
Correct. That seems to be more what we're getting. You know, the days of us doing a lot of subdivision plats are probably over. So we're getting folks like up on, just use the example, up on Camelback. Years ago, a commercial lot was created, and then as the developer found end users, the first being Carl's Jr.,
right?
they're on the west side of that particular lot. And then Take 5, which DRB approved the oil change facility earlier this year, they're taking the east half of the lot. So that's technically, that's a minor land division, but we are seeing folks that are coming in and doing lot combinations and,
It's like the U-Haul was a lot combination, correct?
correct.
In every city that I'm aware of processes their lot combinations as a minor land division, so this
Correct.
makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah.
Okay. There's no other questions or comments from commissioners. I'm not seeing any. Let's go on to the next one. Parking and loading regulations. Any questions or comments? I'm not seeing any.
So on this one, if I could just, through the chair, Commissioner Alvey, you're wanting us to look at where the side yard view fence is measured? If you could clarify that.
Basically, where the backyard begins and the side yard is no longer relevant.
Okay.
Basically,
The definition for side yard.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments?
one other little thing. I know that in the code it mentions something along the lines of one space is allowed, but I think in a side yard along, as long as it's part of the garage apron, I believe, something like that. And it's allowed on, I think you're allowed to park a vehicle on one side of the house's yard, if I recall the code correctly.
Do you want to speak to that?
Can that somehow also be included, or can that be elaborated on, or moved to an area that is more specific to the backyard and side yard parking?
Daniel has a comment on that. Go ahead.
Yeah, to the chair and Commissioner Alvey, you are correct. Section 29.11 of the zoning code does limit the parking space or spaces may be located only on one side yard of the residential property.
Okay, so I think that's like another reason why we really need to define side yard and backyard. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Let's go on to the next. Well, that's it.
Yeah, so if there's consensus tonight from the commission for staff to keep working on this, we'll go back. We've taken notes, and if this is something you want us to continue to work on, we'll do some more research and then come back with you with some revised text for you to take a look at.
I think that makes sense.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for the input.
Thank you. On the next item of business, there's no executive sessions. Staff report on current events. Do we have any current events?
To the chair, we have none at this time.
We have none. Commissioner reports on current events. Do we have any commissioners on current events? I'm seeing none. On to adjournment.
Actually, is there any update you can give on Litchfield Square that's happened in the last couple of months?
Yes. Yeah. So, Chair, Commission members, so Woody Scouten retired on June 30th, July 1. So I've taken over that role of being the project manager for Litchfield Square. On the construction side of things, on I believe it was July 24th, we temporarily closed down Honeysuckle Street between Old Litchfield Road and Desert Avenue, just northeast of City Hall here. Our public relations firm, Mac Pro Services, great company, we had a stakeholder meeting here in this room back in June to advise of the temporary closure. We had told the merchants and the property owners in Litchfield Square that the temporary closure was temporary, and this road would reopen to the public by Labor Day weekend. It actually opened the Thursday before Labor Day, and that day I walked and drove on the newly paved section of Honeysuckle. What we did advise the merchants is that the road, although reopening before Labor Day, which it did, there's still some ancillary improvements like street lighting, which I don't believe existed on Honeysuckle. That'll be put in. Our electrical subcontractor, they're waiting on light poles to be delivered. There was quite a lead time on that, just to get into some of the level of detail. This week, despite the weather that's happening right now, on the south side of Honeysuckle, the contractor was going in on the same day, removing broken up and existing sidewalks in front of each business, removing the old sidewalks, forming the new sidewalks, pouring the new sidewalks, finishing the sidewalks, letting it dry overnight, and then the next day they would pull the forms. So I did a drive-by this morning, and they are basically working and coordinating in front of each business and letting the tenant know, because sometimes the tenant or business owner is separate from the property owner. So the sidewalks are, permanent sidewalks are being built on the south side of Honeysuckle to make the street look pretty with street trees and landscaping. That'll come later, later this fall. As I think most of the commission is aware of, last year, about a year ago, the city sold Lot 3 to a local developer. They are in for plan review. Daniel's been reviewing the plans for a two-story mixed-use project, mixed-use building. It's about 40,000 square feet. Lot 3, I don't have a map in front of me, but that's on the north end of Litchfield Square. It's up near Scout Park and Scout Lodge. So we're hoping that if everything goes well, that permits will be issued for Lot 3, hopefully this fall. In meeting with the contractor and the developer over the last few weeks, they feel it's probably a one-year build for that project. We are currently in a conversation with a local developer to buy the rest of Litchfield Square. I can't tell you a lot because it's been the subject of executive session with council, but I believe there will be an agenda item on council agenda on the 20th if everything comes into play. Thank you, Daniel. Daniel's sharing an aerial photo. So Lot 3 is in the blue area. The street configuration, the aerial doesn't show the current street. The Village Parkway is pretty much done between Litchfield Road and Old Litchfield Road. The section south of the church at Litchfield Park is not done. That project will be, we're coordinating with the church on timing. We're going to be permanently closing. They have one driveway. I don't know if you can zoom in on that, Dan. There you go. That driveway, the church is aware of this, that driveway will be closed, and that driveway where Daniel's pointing to will be removed. About a year ago, the Board of Adjustment approved a zero lot line variance for, the church has expansion plans to rebuild or build up to the property line. So that's a project they're working on fundraising right now. So for that particular project, Lot 3, there will be a new roadway or driveway north of Village Parkway on the east side of Lot 3, where the church will get a new driveway access point to the parking lot, right where Daniel's pointing to. What else can I tell you?
When do you expect Village Parkway to be open through there?
Cheryl, that's a good question. If you go out there today, you can look through the temporary construction fencing. The road's pretty much done. What we're when we open that, will be subject to a couple things. One is how much other work Aiken Gardner has to do with areas south of Village Parkway. Can you point out the park, Daniel? I can't give you a definitive time frame. I would think maybe by the end of the year. We've been talking to Aiken Gardner about the timing of that, because when you go out and if you really study and do a field inspection, the road's pretty much done. We are working, the area outlined in blue is a city-owned parcel. It's going to be basically Litchfield Square Park, and we're working on, our designer is EPS Group. They're a local landscape architectural planning and engineering firm. They're preparing design plans for the phase one of the park. So we hope to have the park under construction here probably early next year.
What will phase one include?
Phase one, it will basically be a lot of open space, so grass, not a lot of hardscape improvements. The perimeter on all four sides of the park will be done as part of the roadway improvements, so we'll have on-street parking on all four sides. We'll have EV charging stations on the perimeter of the park. We don't have a lot of EV stations in Litchfield Park right now. I think we have, the Wigwam has some charging stations somewhere on their campus. Part of the design plan for Litchfield Square is that we will have EV charging stations available for public use. We're working out some of the details with Aiken Gardner and with some of their subcontractors. Long term, we are talking about with Aiken Gardner what's the end game for them finishing up the roadway improvements so that we have a finished product. Probably about a year out still. Daniel, can you go down to the Welcome Center? On the northeast corner of Camelback, of Wigwam Boulevard and Litchfield Road it's identified on the Litchfield Square master plan as the Welcome Center. It's not a building, but it's trying to get people. We don't have a bus line on Litchfield Road, but we have, if you, right where Daniel's pointing the cursor, there's basically a bus bay. What we're thinking is that could be a ride share, drop-off, pickup location. Over the summer when Woody was still here, we took to DRB a design plan for the Welcome Center. DRB was pretty much okay with the project. They did not like some of the structure, the shade structures, so we promised DRB that we would go back to the designer, make some changes, and then come back at a later date. But if you go out there today, there's some boulders that have been temporarily placed. They're not set. They're laying on top of the ground. Usually with boulders, they're buried about 1/3. This is usually the landscape standard, but the boulders were placed there to keep people from illegally accessing Litchfield Square. There's a trellis that, if you look closely, has been installed right about where Daniel's pointing. That'll eventually have vines and landscaping around it. We just haven't gotten to that stage of the landscape installation with our subcontractor. The stockpiles that are shown those are millings, ground up asphalt. Those have been removed and used elsewhere for dust-free parking. There's a dirt stockpile that I know has gotten a lot of attention from the community. A little bit further north where Daniel's pointing. Our intention is to take, that's excess soil that's not needed for Litchfield Square. Our intention is to have that dirt stockpile moved up to Hilltop, so we can use that for a project up in Hilltop up on Camelback and Litchfield Road, right about where Daniel's pointing. We're unrelated to Litchfield Square. There's the old train depot building. It's being stored down in Goodyear right now. We're going to be moving that building up to Hilltop probably first of the year, and so that's a separate project up in Hilltop where the city of Litchfield Park owns the train station, but it's being stored down at the Goodyear Public Works yard. So our city engineer Keith Bernavsky is working to get that moved up to Litchfield Park. Back to Litchfield Square, things are moving moving along as planned. We are working with Aiken Gardner on the final phases of maybe what the area immediately north of and east of City Hall looks like in terms of parking lots. There is a need for city parking in Litchfield Square for this building, this facility, so we're working out some of those details now with Aiken Gardner.
What about those beautiful monument signs that we approved? What stage is that in?
Through the chair, Commissioner O'Connor, the monument signs they're basically designed. I'm not sure what the timing is for installation, but I can get back to you on that. I don't know how much detail you want me to keep going. There's some, we don't have our own water and sewer system. We rely on Liberty Utilities. There's Daniel, can you go over to Old Litchfield Road? As part of Litchfield Square, it was identified that there was some infrastructure in the ground that needed some attention. So the city engineer has been working with Liberty, and at basically the northwest and southwest corner of Honeysuckle and Old Litchfield Road, there's some aging Liberty water line facilities, water valve. There's a water valve that was relocated, I believe, Thursday night, Friday morning, at the immediate northwest corner of Honeysuckle and Old Litchfield Road. That was in the middle of where we're going to be building an ADA accessible ramp, so that needed to be moved outside of the ramp. We didn't want the public using an ADA ramp where they might trip on a valve box, so that's been moved. And then associated with that, to isolate, if I'm remembering this correctly, so all of the restaurants on the south side of Honeysuckle, when the next phase of work, I believe, is occurring this week, weather permitting, where we're going to be moving another valve and connecting an 8-inch and a 6-inch water line together, and moving a shutoff valve about where Daniel's cursor is, right in that area, right outside of Papa Paul's, so that if there was a water line break in the future, Liberty could shut the valve off without shutting the water off to all of the merchants on Honeysuckle. So might be giving you too much detail, but what we're finding out in the field is there's a lot of, either Aiken Gardner is finding items out in the field that were not mapped or we didn't know existed, or they're not where we thought they were. I think back in July there was a brief water line disruption about where that tree's located. Keep going east a little bit for that tree there. Literally within 2 hours, Aiken Gardner was able to, before the restaurants opened up that morning, it was a Thursday, before the restaurants opened up, Aiken Gardner was able to do an emergency repair and get the water back on, so there was no disruption to service for the restaurants. So finding all kinds of different things out in the field and trying to fix things up.
Great, thank you for the report.
Thank you.
Anybody else have any other reports they'd like to provide? Seeing none, we'll move on to adjournment.
So moved. Second.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, seeing none, the motion passes. Meeting is adjourned.